Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another episode of In the Frame. Today I'm going to talk about Indicator's February releases. It's another 4 individual films, another 4 older films, which that's in my wheelhouse, let's be honest. So we've got spine number 447, 448, 471 and 473. So we have 447, which is Joan Crawford and Wendell Corey and Harriet Craig, from 1950, directed by Vincent Sherman. And then we have Joan Crawford and Queen Bee, in 1955, directed by Randall McDougall. We have Now and Forever with Gary Cooper, Carole Lombard and Shirley Temple. You know I'm all about this one with Carole Lombard. This is from 1934, directed by Henry Hathaway. And then we have spine number 473, Peter Ibbotson with Gary Cooper, Anne Harding, from 1935, also directed by Henry Hathaway. Because Henry Hathaway and Gary Cooper did 7 films together, but that's never really mentioned when people talk about director-actor collaborations. So again, I'm just going to go through each individual one. I would say one of them you must just go out and buy immediately. Also, I'm biased with who's in it. I wonder if you can guess which one. The other 3 are probably sale items if you want to pick them up. They're not going to sell out. Again, they're all 3,000 copies. But they're probably sale items if you are interested in them. But certainly one of them stands above the other. So we'll start with Harriet Craig, with Joan Crawford. Again, you could argue Joan Crawford was never a great actress, but I'm not going to tell that to her face. But what a presence. What a presence. I mean, Joan Crawford, Betty Davis, Barbara Stanwyck, Ida Lupino. I mean, they don't make them like that anymore. There'll never be equivalents of those women. It's funny, Hal Hartley used to say that the only reason people watched his films was to see when Martin Donovan would break something. Well, you could argue, certainly myself, but Joan Crawford fans only watch Joan Crawford films for the scenes where she just goes ballistic and just like goes on a rage. And don't worry, both these films have full-blown Joan Crawford. Harriet Craig, I would say, is probably the lesser of the 4 films, objectively, but it's still well worth checking out. Obviously, if you're a Joan Crawford fan, it's wonderful seeing more of her in high definition. This has a commentary from Glenn Kenny and Farron Smith Nahemi from 2025. A Word of Control, 19 minutes, where Liza Lankman discusses the making of the film and its place in Joan Crawford's career, which is wonderful. We have a radio play adaptation, only starring Orson Welles and Anne Harding, who strangely enough is in Peter Ibbotson. You've got another version of it from 1941 with Rosalind Russell and Herbert Marshall. And you have a trailer. Again, the golden era of Hollywood. It is kind of bizarre that a lot of actors did the radio versions as well. That just obviously never happens nowadays. And again, you get the booklet and it's always the star on one side and the director on the other side. And again, you've got essays and pictures. So this is a melodrama about Joan Crawford playing a somewhat controlling wife of a much younger man, Wendell Corey, who works in a lab. We see test tubes and stuff, so it must be a lab. And she is very concerned about class and, you know, how everything looks to the neighbours and all of that. She doesn't like the fact that Wendell Corey has got kind of friends who like to drink and play cards. He talks to the widow next door who's got a wee boy that he's friendly with. She treats her staff very badly. The old woman who plays the housekeeper, she was actually in the house with Wendell Corey. She used to look after him, so Crawford came into the house and then took over. I mean, you wonder why Crawford played all these characters who turned out to be like hell on wheels, but she's just so good at it. This was actually based on a Pulitzer Prize winning play called Craig's Wife, which might be one of the blandest titles for a play ever. There's wonderful moments. You know, at one point Wendell Corey's boss green lights him to have a trip to Japan, which obviously Crawford is not happy about. The couple can't have children, even though there's various versions of why that is. It really kicks off in the last half hour. I mean, it's solid. It's certainly worth seeing Crawford doing Crawford things. And Wendell Corey, who was really nice in The Big Knife with Jack Palance and Rod Steiger, as the kind of cool, uncaring executive for the film industry. It's a lot of fun, but again, it's probably a solid film, and if you want it, I would wait for the sales. But then we have 448, which is Queen Bee, which is Joan Crawford blonde, which we don't see very often. This one is top drawer Joan Crawford. This is about a young woman who's Joan Crawford's cousin, who comes down to the bayou to stay with Joan Crawford. All the kind of characters are introduced, and then of course Crawford comes in at the end, you know, because she needs the big introduction. Co-stars Barry Sullivan, who's always wonderful as Joan Crawford's husband, who's taken to the drink, basically. Betsy Palmer's in it, John Ireland's in it. It's just, I mean, you can even see in that picture, that kind of exudes what the character's like. There's just such brilliant dialogue. It's pure vitriolic. It might be too vitriolic for some people. The fact that it's actually a 12, but obviously ratings nowadays, if you hit kind of hot buttons, then you're going to get like a 12 or a 15. You could argue there's really nobody likeable in the film, but again, it's one of those that you don't care because it's just like a car accident, which features a couple of times in the film. It's just a car accident, just watching these people clash. It's just so much fun, and but Crawford, again, I said earlier, you would perhaps say she's a great actor, but she treads the thin line in this so beautifully, of being somebody that is just an absolutely terrible person, but there's actually moments that you kind of feel sorry for her. You kind of empathise with her at times, even though she's a complete monster. This has a commentary with David Jenkins, 2025. A Sting in the Tail, another Lies Lankman piece from 2025 about the film. Fit for a Queen, film historian Natalie Morris explores the career of iconic costume designer Jean Louis, and this trailer and of course the booklet. So this one is a lot more fun than Harriet Craig, but again, you can easily wait for a sale if you're interested, unless you're desperate for Joan Crawford, as I was. But again, you can get this in the sale this year. I know Indicator generally only do one sale or maybe a flash sale during the year, but this is so much fun. Obviously I don't know how it was at the time. This is one of the projects Joan Crawford actually wanted to do. She wanted to play this character even though she's a complete monster. So it's kind of interesting that, you know, we kind of look back on Joan Crawford's career and she played all these crazy characters, but she actually wanted to play all these crazy characters. But again, there's just scenes where she goes full Joan Crawford that are just absolutely brilliant. There's a scene where she smashes up somebody's room. It's just incredible. So Queen Bee I would highly recommend, but not as much as the next one. This is 471, Now and Forever, Gary Cooper, Carole Lombard, and some wee kid called Shirley Temple, who was 8 at the time. Was she 8 or was she 6? She might have been 6, I'm not quite sure. This is a commentary with Pamela Hutchinson from 2025. This is a 16-minute piece, bright as a penny, where critic Christina Newland examines the career of Shirley Temple. And it's a fascinating piece. I mean, obviously she didn't last that long in cinema because she left because the stories of like producers exposing themselves to her. But at one point she was making 60 grand a week, or 60 grand a week equivalent for our time a week as like a 10-year-old, which isn't bad work. But she then later went into politics, which I didn't know about. She was an ambassador to, I can't even remember the country now. So she certainly had an interesting life, and she's not actually annoying in this. Again, I am biased because the Lombard is in it, and this is a fascinating performance by the Lombard, but I'll get to that. And there's the three of them looking wonderful. Now again, Gary Cooper is actually really good in this, saying in a recent MOC that he's probably miscast in Fritz Lang's Cloak and Dagger, but he's actually really good in this. So he plays basically a shiftless playboy who we find out has a kid, Shirley Temple, but he's never even seen her. He pretty much palmed her off to his brother-in-law after his wife died, didn't want anything to do with her. And his new wife is Carole Lombard, and they basically just live a life of arsing about in Europe. But he's running out of money, so he decides to sell the kid. He decides to sell the kid, not on eBay, but to his brother-in-law for 70 grand. Which obviously Carole Lombard's a bit shocked that he's got a kid, which he's never mentioned before. But during the process of selling her, Gary Cooper actually gets to like her a little bit, and because his brother-in-law is traditional and a bit of a insert expletive, he decides, well, maybe he will actually take her, which Shirley Temple actually absolutely loves, and she absolutely loves him, but she's a bit suspicious of Carole Lombard initially, before they kind of hit it off. But of course, because he is a little bit penniless, you know, he's a scam artist, and Sir Guy Standing, which is always a fun name, he's a bit of a shyster as well, and he targets this old woman who they try and scam to get money out of. Again, it's sort of a comedy, but it does go to darker places. and that's why for me you can watch this with Lombard's Made for Each Other with James Stewart, which again starts as a kind of screwball comedy but goes to dark places, and it kind of shows that Lombard, if she'd lived, sadly, don't talk to her about it, if she'd lived, sadly, you know, she would have done dramatic roles as well. She would have become like the greatest of all time, because she's not just the screwball, the comedy actor. What's fascinating is this was the same year as 20th Century, where she does play almost like the first screwball, Howard Hawks' 20th Century, the same year. But this is a slightly more bits of comedy, but bits of drama as well. There is a scene where Shirley Temple dies, and apparently dies. Sorry, that was not a spoiler alert. Shirley Temple does not die. That might have just been a Freudian slip. Shirley Temple cries, was what I was trying to say. You know, English isn't my first language. And allegedly they're real tears because somebody that she knew died and nobody told her until they were shooting that scene. Hooray for Hollywood. Yeah. So Shirley Temple's actually very good in this. I was kind of dreading watching a Shirley Temple film, but she's actually very good in it. I have to give her credit. Not necessarily 60 grand a week, but I'll give her credit. Yeah, it goes to dark places, and the old woman, her character is brilliant as well, because she knows that Gary Cooper is a bit of a cad, and she offers to take the kid for a wee while, and she'll pay because she just wants that kid around her in her last years, and it's actually quite poignant. There's a couple of moments in the film where I almost got something in my eye, and I actually found the film quite moving, and I don't know why. It's a film that I should really hate. Obviously I can't hate a film with Carole Lombard in it, but if Carole Lombard wasn't in it, well, maybe I wouldn't have bought it. But yeah, it's a film that I shouldn't really like, but I did actually find it quite moving, and it is absolutely wonderful. So this is certainly my recommendation out of the four. I mean, all four of them are worth seeing, but again, probably not at full price. But this one I would highly recommend, and not just because I'm a Carole Lombard fan. And then we have Peter Ibbotson, again directed by Henry Hathaway, from a novel by George du Maurier, not the other du Maurier. Yeah, this is odd. Gary Cooper and Anne Harding. Now Anne Harding is one of those forgotten actresses of the kind of golden era, or just before the golden era. She was a big theatre and silent actor, and one of the first kind of superstars of the early talkies, but again, she's pretty much been forgotten about. I mean, I didn't really recognise her particularly. This has got a commentary by Adrian Martin from 2025. Jeff Andrew does an 18-minute piece talking about the film and its stars. There's a radio version, again, with Orson Welles and Helen Hayes and Agnes Moorehead. I'll have to check that out. And again, there's a nice booklet. And this is quite interesting because it co-stars Ida Lupino, who I mentioned earlier. This is Ida Lupino in 1935, so she was only 17 in this, and she looks just so young. She's playing a bit of a flirt. So this is about two people, Gary Cooper and Anne Harding, who grow up as children in Paris. They're always bickering, they're neighbours, and they're always bickering. There's a wonderful fight over the possession of bits of wood, because somebody wants to build a dollhouse and somebody wants to build a cart. But Gary Cooper is taken away by his bad uncle to live in London, where he becomes an architect, but he's just not happy. He's always got, he's always thinking of his lost love. I think that's the word people use, and he always, is thinking over his blind boss. Yeah, he's got a blind boss who runs an architecture company. This is set in the 18th century, sorry, the 1800s, I should say. So he goes on holiday to Paris, he meets Ida Lupino and has some fun. He goes back to the old house, which is now in ruins, and all that does is bring back memories. So he goes back to his job, which he'd threatened to leave. But after his holiday, he's kind of G'd up again with the memories of his lost love, that's what they call it. He gets sent out to this on this job. He has to stay for about 3 months because he's going to renovate this duke's stables. But of course the Duchess is the little girl who at first doesn't realise who he is, but eventually she realises who he is. But of course she's married to the Duke, which obviously causes problems. At some point, Gary Cooper, he ends up behind bars, and there's no other way of saying it. He ends up behind bars for something. But they have this sort of almost psychic connection. And at that point, the film gets quite weird, which is kind of odd for a 1935 film, but it gets really weird. They can kind of project to each other in another realm. Obviously, I was not sniffing glue when I watched this film. This is actually true. So they still kind of communicate with each other in this other realm. So it's the idea of, love never dies, and, if you are, hooked to a person, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're alive or dead, you'll still be able to communicate with them, and you'll still be able to walk with them. It's a lovely idea. Complete nonsense, but it's a lovely idea. So this film, for me, it doesn't completely work, but you gotta give them credit for swinging for the fences. Again, you could argue Cooper's a little miscast. You could argue that Anne Harding's a little weak, and maybe an older Ida Lupino would have perhaps been better, but Ida Lupino would have been miscast at 17 for this role. So it's certainly worth seeing. Again, I'm definitely going to have to watch it again, because you could argue it's a failure, but it's certainly an interesting failure, because they went for it. They didn't quite land it, I don't think, but they went for it. I should say the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. The black and white cinematography, especially in the last half hour of the film, and in this other realm, is quite beautiful. So 4 films again. Oh, why should you watch films from the 30s and 40s? Because they're pretty fantastic and interesting. So that's February's indicator slate, one of which I would say go out and buy immediately. Buy 20 copies for each one of your televisions. But the rest, to be fair, you can get all of these in a sale at some point. You don't need to buy them at full price, I wouldn't say. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen any of these strange little films and what you think of them. Again, last year you could argue, Indicator didn't particularly blow anybody away with the releases. And certainly at the beginning of this year you could argue they're not blowing people away with the releases, but they just continue to do solid work of these films that I wasn't really familiar with. And obviously any Carole Lombard release for me is an immediate purchase. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen them and what you think of them, and hopefully you'll join me again for more episodes of In the Frame. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.